button come up here soon, a little red dot. I think it'll show that it's being recorded. So, in closing, I'd like to thank you for participating in the 2022 Partners in Action Annual Conference. Now I'll introduce the presenter. Please welcome Heidi Schultz.
Good afternoon. Making sure I am on. I think I have mic on, camera on. Make sure I say okay to recording. Okay, we're rocking and rolling. And there goes Robert. He's going to share his screen and he has our PowerPoint. So Robert is kindly going to flip through our slides for us today. Good afternoon and welcome to our session titled Using Indigenous Knowledge to Prevent and Respond to Disasters. As Robert said, I'm Heidi Schultz and my title is Program Manager for the Midwest Early Recovery Funds, and more specifically Native American Tribal Communities Recovery Program. And I work for the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. My pronouns, are she and her. And as we begin this session, as Robert said, if you can mute your mic, if you want to, you can go off camera. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat and I'll try to monitor as I can. And we can take questions throughout, and there is kind of a Q&A towards the end of our session as well. And as we begin this session, like we do at all times we do anything public with CDP, we'd like to acknowledge that we are working from the stolen lands of the many original peoples. And we recognize that Indigenous peoples have been displaced and disenfranchised from their land by the socioeconomic and cultural devastation of colonialism, as well as disasters. We acknowledge when the U.S. was founded, there were exclusions and erasures of Indigenous knowledge about how to appropriately care for these lands, causing environmental destruction and degradation, which has had a significant impact on disaster risk and on communities. We are committed to dismantling the ongoing legacy systems and structures of settler colonialism and white supremacy. We commit ourselves to understand where and how wealth accumulation has harmed people and Mother Earth herself, and the complexities of philanthropy as connected to that truth. Despite centuries of theft, violence, and murder, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Please join us in acknowledging the original peoples and the elders, past, present, and future, not only the lands where I'm coming from today, which is not my home, but I am in St. Louis, Missouri, but the lands where you are as well. So the goals of today, so bear with us. We did this session as a CDP webinar, and it has its own kind of format, and we're changing it up and BIA asked us if we presented here. So we try to kind of change it a little bit, but stick to kind of the basic information that we shared earlier because we thought it was good to share. So our goals for this session is that the participants will have an increased understanding of traditional Indigenous knowledge related specifically to the environment, and developed an enhanced understanding of how to support and work with Indigenous communities, and to really think about climate change and disasters from a much more holistic perspective than we maybe typically do. So what is Indigenous knowledge? So just to kind of get us on the same page of kind of where we're coming from today, we think it's an important role that for Indigenous knowledge and disasters and climate resiliency. And we believe strongly in that. And as you'll hear from one of our speakers, it's also an area that we have funded. And yet, despite the work that I do, managing our Native American and Tribal Communities program, I admit that this is absolutely an area that I don't know a lot about, and I'm very eager to learn from our speakers right alongside you today. So my colleagues on the CDP Learning and Partnership team pulled together some information, some background that I want to share so we can kind of frame the issues. And I think this, again, will get us on the same page. So here's a definition. There's many definitions. Indigenous knowledge is the unique local knowledge that has been passed down through generations and developed throughout history, through history, experience, experiments, and understanding of the environment. Further, Indigenous knowledge is a body of knowledge built up by a group of people through generations of living in close contact with nature. Generally speaking, such knowledge evolves in the local environment so that it is specifically adapted to the requirements of local people and conditions. It is also creative and experimental, constantly incorporating outside influences and inside innovations to meet new conditions. And today we're using this term very specifically to refer to First Peoples or original inhabitants. Some people prefer to use local knowledge to represent the information and awareness of a community as differentiated from technical or scientific knowledge. So there's some key characteristics, a lot, and they're listed here. I'm not going to read through those, but here are some of the key characteristics for additional traditional knowledge. And it kind of all flows into or out of some of those definitions that I shared as well. So again, just to frame the subject matter, here's some kind of statistics, some numbers to, again, kind of get us on the same page to start with. So globally, there are about 370 million Indigenous peoples. They make up only 4 to 5% of the world's population, but they inhabit 22 to 25% of our Earth's surface. They support about 80% of global biodiversity. That's huge. The World Bank says some of the most biologically important lands and waters are intact as a result of Indigenous peoples' stewardship. Their knowledge and expertise on how to adapt, mitigate, and reduce risks from climate change and natural disasters are considered vital. Adequately responding to these challenges requires considering Indigenous peoples as fundamental stakeholders and important partners. Partners is the important word, I think, in this development process.
Heidi?
Yes.
This is Gwen.
Hi.
We got a message in the chat room. Chat said, can the presenter change the view to presentation mode? The text is really small to read as it is.
Okay, so Robert, if you go to your screen and you go to slideshow, I think it will only show one slide at a time. From current slide, go over to your left. I'm watching your mouse. Left, left. One more. There you go. Whoops, one more. Oh, it's going to go from the beginning. Now you have to click through a little bit. There we go. And then I think so I'm not a good Teams. That's not what I use every day, but I do think there's a presentation mode and they just won't see as much of us. And Chelsea says that's not still quite right. Chelsea, are you a Microsoft Teams user? That's why I had Robert drive today, because I don't customarily use this. So if anybody has some great Teams ideas, there we go, display settings. That looks promising. Ooh, that looks good. The second one, or the first one. How's that, people? On my screen, I'm. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay, I was gonna say, I see the slide and I see me little, and then I just see a little chat box. So to me, that looks pretty good. Thank you for that feedback. Awesome. We aim to please. So now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers and experts. I am not Native. I have the wonderful honor of working with Native peoples, but I always want to hear Native voices. And today we have the beautiful, we're all beautiful. Patricia's taught me that inside and out, right? Patricia Velasquez is an award-winning actress, supermodel, philanthropist, activist, and author. She is Wayuu, an Amerindian ethnic group of the Guajira Peninsula in the northernmost part of Colombia and northwest Venezuela. She founded the Wayuu Taya Foundation in 2002 to help improve the lives of Latin American Indigenous communities while maintaining and respecting their traditions, culture, and beliefs. She holds numerous roles on international boards and task forces. And in just a second, we're going to hear from Patricia. I'm going to quick do Shelley's introduction too. So then Patricia's going to visit a little bit, share some slides, and then Shelley, and then we'll all do some questions. Shelley Ryder has worked for the American Red Cross for just shy of 17 years, including the past 9 as a Division Disaster State Relations Director. She currently supports Louisiana, Oklahoma, Kansas, and FEMA Region 6 in the Southwest and the Rocky Mountain Division. In addition, she has represented the Red Cross as a member of the Elite Emergency Management Institute Tribal Emergency Management Cadre. Woo, that's a lot to say, of instructors for the past 8 years. That means she teaches us, right? She teaches us how to do response and recovery. She's also the Red Cross Tribal Relations subject matter expert and lead supporting national and local tribal relations. She is one of my main go-tos. Like just before we started, I'm like, hey, who do you know in Crow, Montana? So Shelley's a good person to call. Shelley resides in Norman, Oklahoma, and is a very proud Native woman and citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. So I want to turn it over to you, Patricia, and hear about your work.
Thank you so much, Heidi. It's an honor to be here, and it's really an honor to share this space with Shelley. As you mentioned it before, I am Indigenous. I am from a community called Wayuu, that we are about 500,000 people right on the border between Venezuela and Colombia. And the Wayuu community is one of the only matriarchal Indigenous communities in the world. And if there's one thing that we have been taught since we're little, is how to treat the land. And I wanted to ask you, I'm sure many of us are Indigenous in this chat, but I just wanted to ask the ones that are not Indigenous, or how we call in Wayuu, if you're an Alihuna in the Wayuu dialect, means non-Indigenous, how in general do you think Indigenous people treat the land? Well, I'm going to tell you, we have lived in harmony with nature for millennia. But unfortunately, modern man has, over the last century, delivered devastating blows, from forests to rivers to oceans, at a huge cost to ourselves. So what can we learn from Indigenous people to stop or assault on nature? We need to recognize that the existence of Indigenous culture and peoples, it's important for humanity, for our immense contribution to development, plurality, and cultural diversity. Do you know how Indigenous communities have regarded the land through centuries? Very simple and very truth. You take only what you need and you feed it back, because nature needs to be in perfect balance. While so many civilizations have fought against each other throughout history and have disappeared, Indigenous communities, we have remained. Why? It's because of the same belief of balance. Just like Heidi was mentioning at the beginning, do you know that 95% of the surface of Earth shows human modification? And 85% shows multiple forms of human impact? And do you know, this is something that makes me so proud in a way, because do you know that nature on Indigenous people's lands is degrading less quickly than in other areas? Indigenous communities are some of the best environmental stewards. We also play an important role in long-term monitoring of our ecosystems. This is critical, especially because some of our groups live in remote areas, and it's really our communities that are collecting the data, often through just everyday experiences. And Indigenous peoples will play a critical role of protecting the planet's biodiversity and the overall health of our ecosystems. The United Nations Environment Program affirms the sustainable production, and I'm going to read this, the sustainable production and consumption of Indigenous and traditional food has invaluable benefits for natural resources and ecosystems, contributes to a sustainable and healthier diet, and help mitigate climate change. The current pandemic reflects our connectedness to one another and how actions in one part of the world can affect us all. So what can we do? Every small action you can individually take connects us and creates a ripple effect for all of us. I wanted to show you a little bit in terms of the Wayuu Taya Foundation. If we can go back on the slides to where it says Shukumahaya. For generations, Wayuu women have learned to create woven susu bags. And it takes about 21 days for a woman to make these bags. So the Wayuu Taya Foundation started the sales of the bags, which then go back to the community. At the same time, we created a social space where counseling and orientation and family planning, nutrition, hygiene, and many other workshops were given. We sold quite a few bags. And the reason why I wanted to tell you this is, how can funders trust Indigenous communities? I give you a little bit of background of, how we use our traditions, how we then, in the name of traditions, we can create sustainability. Indigenous communities are the best stewardess for the well-being of the most privileged communities. Although, like Haiti mentioned at the beginning, we're only 6% of world population. We safeguard 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. We have a sense of sharing, permanency, and especially we are used to work in emergency situations. We have learned at Wayutaya that if we give our communities the tools, Indigenous communities want to be accountable. We just want to be included. We just need to be included. I'm going to show you in the next slide 2 examples of 2 grants that we have received during COVID for Wayutaya. One of them was COVID-19 emergency response. While so many things were happening in the area in Venezuela and even the Colombian side, nobody was able to go out. Wayutaya was out helping an important number of the most vulnerable people affected by the pandemic through the purchase and distribution of the following, the protective personal equipment and different health supplies. Or this grant allowed Wayutaya to give masks to 7,500 children about, and many other things doctors didn't have, nurses didn't have. And at the same time, we also received another grant that we call the Recovery and Rebuild Grant that served over 1.4 million meals, that today is more than 2.2 million meals. And we reached more than 28,000 people. And with that grant, we also purchased a well that initiated a water sustainable program in sustainable farming. So the Indigenous population in general, in South America, and I know here too, but I'm just talking about our countries at this point, have the least access to infrastructure and are the most vulnerable. In many areas, we have no access to water, no electricity, gas, or sewage system, which has resulted in proliferation of disease, malnutrition, and viruses. Yet the population remains incredibly resilient. And we have been resilient for many generations. We have dealt with emergencies for centuries. We also know how to plan ahead. When we receive, like when I was mentioning before, the example of the 2 grants, and we know how to partner, we know how to work among communities. And while everybody else is trying to figure things out, we are taking action. We just need the tools. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. Go ahead, Shelley.
No, that's great. Just a sound check, making sure you can hear me.
I sure can. And I'll watch the chat for anybody that says otherwise.
All right, thank you. Oh, I have all the thumbs up. Thank you. So I want to say thank you, of course, to my esteemed co-presenter, Patricia. We have done this now a couple of times, and I learned something new every time from her. So what Patricia spoke about was more of an international experience and what international Indigenous lives look like and what the grants and the lifeways and all of that. So I'm going to move more to the domestic side. As mentioned, I do work very specifically in disaster, although I now kind of work across all lines of service. I am specific to disaster in my day-to-day work. I'm going to cover just kind of the increasing pace of disasters, just a couple of statistics. So I know we've been watching this today. I'm in Norman, Oklahoma. I actually happen to be home. I don't know if I'm the lucky one today or not. We are going to reach 111 actual degrees out of something like 22 days over 100 degrees, and we still have another 2 weeks over 100 degrees, which is highly unusual for us at this time of year. And so, we hear a lot about climate change and climate adaptation, but just a few statistics. So over the past 2 decades, we've experienced more climate disasters than any other nation in the world. 8 million people have been displaced by disasters since 2010, and the annual number of billion-dollar disasters has increased 6-fold over the last 3 years. And I don't know if everybody looked, but the Weather Channel released a study of billion-dollar disasters so far in 2022, and there are 9. We are not even hardly 7 months into this year, and we already have 9 separate over $1 billion disasters, and they're ones that you don't expect, like a derecho and things like that. They're not the big hurricanes and the big wildfires conclusively. More than 40% of Americans, roughly 130 million people, live in some form of jurisdiction struck by a climate disaster in 2021. And over the last 30 years, the number of wildfires, or the number of acres burned by wildfires, has more than doubled, and the intensity of storms and hurricanes has progressively increased. And then 2020 and 2021, of course, we don't have the 2022 statistics yet on this. We averaged a new major disaster response every week and a half, and those are by Red Cross standards. And what that means is that we're looking at that $500,000 to $1 million disaster, a new one every week and a half, about every 10 days. Next slide. So climate change is disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable, and they're who we think of, right? The low income families, the older adults, communities of color, people with disabilities. And statistically, we can prove this. We have a social vulnerability index that we use frequently, daily, hourly now, to determine what our client base is going to look like after impact, and even before impact in some cases. And those geographies, those geographic areas are growing by leaps and bounds right now. COVID as a pandemic that continues on impacted these communities in ways that others were not. Everyone was impacted, but in ways that are not necessarily as visible, I think, from the outside. So when these families impacted not only by disaster and then by the pandemic, and the families are forced from their homes, they tend to remain displaced for longer periods of time and experienced an increased risk of poverty and suffer from chronic housing, hunger, and health challenges. I'll talk about that in just a minute. The displacement is often catastrophic, and it pushes people who are on the very brink of poverty into a free fall that is very hard to recover from. Health, housing, and hunger for Red Cross is our initiative, and we call it the 3 H's. Those are the things that we're focusing on in what we call mission adaptation coming up for the next year. And we're doing this in conjunction with a number of other voluntary agency partners, looking at partners across the board, also with tribal governments and federal and state governments as well. And that's a focus on health, right? So spiritual care, health, and mental health. Housing and housing insecurity, which is becoming almost an epidemic in and of itself. And then hunger, of course, tribal, or specifically for this audience, tribal food insecurity, water insecurity, or we're going to see in just a second, actual tribal food security. And I want to make a note on this map. This is the 2020 hurricane season track. So you can see how many are out there. That is the season of Hurricane Laura. As mentioned, I do cover Louisiana. I did ride out Laura and Ida, but also in this particular year, kind of talking about that climate change or that climate impact. There were roughly 10 systems that came in right before and right on top of and right after Hurricane Laura. We actually had 5 separate declared hurricanes for impact all across the Gulf Coast of Louisiana that year. And that's highly unusual, but I use that as an example. You can go back and look at, it was Lake Charles, it was New Orleans, it was New Iberia, it was everywhere. And so just looking at that impact again, and we can talk more later if people have questions about specifically what that looks like in those bayou communities, or damaging tornado on the lands of the, I can't see the full chat. I'll check in just a second though. Next slide, please. So talking about, and Patricia mentioned some of this earlier about time and land management, and who's taking care of the land and how we as Indigenous people take care of the land. Time and land management are both symbiotic, right? So it is give, receive, and gratitude, and then repeat. We give, we receive gratitude, and that is for people, that is for land, that is for everything that we do. I would be, after not only being Choctaw, but after all the years that I've been working with tribal communities from across the country, I would be hard pressed to find more generous partners and more open hearts than the partnering that we've been able to do both ways, because it is symbiotic, right, with these Indigenous communities. We are never looking just at today. We're talking about tomorrow. That's our responsibility, right? We look at 100 years. Some tribes say it is 100 years, and some say 7 generations. That really, it just depends. There's no right or wrong way to do that at all. And again, time is cyclical and not linear. It's all connected, past, present, future. Again, it's very symbiotic. Decisions are made with wisdom and guidance from the elders and the ancestors, but also never taking our eye off the youth. And again, those next 7 generations or 100 years to hold that continued viability of the people, the culture, and the place, because that is how the fact that we're still here is incredible. And it's our responsibility right now to take care of those who came before us and take care of those who come after us, to hold that cultural, or that culture and language and all of the foods and the foodways and the lifeways as we move forward to sustain that culture. So I would say I think there's an idea out there, and this is kind of just to dispel a little myth. There's the idea that all tribes were kind of nomadic at first contact, and that's not really true. We had some, primarily the Great Plains tribes, that would kind of move up and down the Great Plains. Those are the ones that we're used to seeing. But many tribes were agrarian, and that means they were farming communities with stable homes, long houses, things like that were already built. They practiced incredible, unbelievable forest thinning and taking care of that land, like Patricia mentioned. So it wasn't specific to one tribe or to all tribes, but it was very much more common than the actual nomadic tribes that would hunt up and down and move with the weather out there in the Great Plains. If you're looking for some examples of that, the Mashpee Wampanoag in Massachusetts, I almost said Maine, sorry, in Massachusetts, you can go back and look at a history of the way that they managed the land, and specifically also the Eastern Band of Cherokee did that same land management with the forest. We don't overhunt, we don't overfish, we don't overgrow, and we really do, like Patricia said, take what we need or what is offered to us from the land and from Mother Nature, and then we give back what needs to be given back, or we share out when we have excess. That's the circle, right? So and some of that circle, the way that we talk about it is that medicine wheel that you see on the screen right now, and that's 4 cardinal directions. That's the stages of life, from birth to adulthood to elder to death. So everything that we do has that same cyclical element, stages of life, the seasons, again, the 4 cardinal directions. And again, it's called a medicine wheel. So if you want to look that up, you are welcome to. When you think about how much we put into the land and how much who we are as people belongs to the land, and you look at the removal, more commonly known as the Trail of Tears, which it's kind of a misnomer for that to be used across the board, but for lack of a better term and for just general explanation, that land loss, being taken from the land where the ancestors are buried, and where generations had lived, and the creation stories came to be, and being moved from that land to another land it's a miracle we survived. And so, but we did, and we rebuilt, and we have started again in new places. Many tribes, actually, I won't say most necessarily, but many tribes aren't on the land that was originally their land, our land. The reservations are kind of wherever the federal government decided to put us during that time, and then move us again and move us again. And so that land loss and gain, you have to understand how much that pulled at the thread of our culture, which is not a culture of individuals. It is a culture of all of us together working in that cyclical way. Somebody grows, somebody hunts, somebody does whatever, and there's always enough for everyone to share, and that's the way it's done. So that individualization that we think of as farming and all of that now, that's still not part of the thread of tribal culture today. Next slide. So, so this is actually the hopeful part about food security and food sovereignty. It actually is the most amazing thing. I see a lot of amazing things in my travels and in the stories that are told to me, but I have seen something really incredible recently, and that was with a visit with the Onondaga at the Iroquois Confederacy. When we're talking about food and food security and what this should look like, food access definitely plays a role in reducing poverty and needs after a disaster, but also before a disaster, right? It comes from the ability for nations to invest in their own communities and not rely on federal funding or outside resources. And I believe the Iroquois Confederacy and specifically the Onondaga don't use any federal funding at all, actually. When we're talking about food access, it has to include foods that the communities decide are important. I've worked with a couple of these communities, and the first thing they ask for separately is a tribal food box, something that doesn't have the standard foods in it, but things more like rice and beans and meats that are specific. So in California, salmon and venison and bison and buffalo as you move to other parts of the country. So as you're thinking about ways to partner, think about those things as well. And then here you can see rice and beans and corn, and I think there's squash off to the right there. And that's actually one of the storage ways that the Iroquois have stored and grown and stored over these years, 4 years worth of food, including a herd of buffalo, some chickens. I think they're adding hogs, and then they have their own maple syrup as well. And this was something that the tribe very much believed in, and they have leaned forward into it. And so again, 4 years worth of food. I think at the end of this year, they're going to have 7 years worth of 5 years. 7 years worth of food by the time the end of this growing season comes back around. And they made that a priority, but they're also growing the foods that mean something to them culturally. Food access, and I did see someone's hand go up. I think I have 2 more little slides and then we can come back and answer that question. But food access has to include cultural preservation and passing on of traditions and the passing on of knowledge of how to grow, harvest, and preserve and serve traditional and ancestral foods. And what the Iroquois also have done is take corn from around the world. I never tire of telling this story. I'm probably over my time, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So, but what they've done is they've taken corn that no longer has people, Anasazi corn, and they are cataloging it and they are documenting it and they are storing it specifically. And they won't be the only tribe that does this. They're gonna duplicate it with at least 3 other tribes as a sustainability, but also as a passing of that history and that ancestral history. I've been in the storage room where they have it, and you almost can't breathe in there. It's so beautiful. And there's I can't even tell you. I think they have 1,200 separate breeds, brands, varieties of corn in there right now, and they expect to have over 4,000 cataloged from around the world before they finish. So that's just an aside to that. And this again is one of their storage things, and beans from magic beans from everywhere. So next slide. So funding for Indigenous communities, and I'm going to read this more in the way I think of this audience really would interpret it, and it's really about how to partner, I think, is more the way instead of just the funding. So it's important to really dispel the myth that the public has around Native communities, public and private, right? Because people everywhere have this, that somehow there's some money, or that the casinos cover all the expenses and everybody gets free college and all of that. And that is categorically untrue. Every tribe is very individual with the way they manage that. And the gaming compacts with the state and federal governments really determine where that money, thank you for the clap, really determine where that money is spent. And so you can't, it's kind of the old don't judge a book by its cover. You can't look at the outside of one tribe and believe that you can understand everything about what's happening inside. And you can see $1 billion casino and then also food insecurity basically standing right next to each other. And so that a lot of the funding that comes in and out of tribes is already predetermined, where it can go and how it can be spent. Less than 1% of all charitable contributions nationally go to support Native American causes. Many tribes are located not only in food deserts, which mean I think we all know what a food desert is, but also in housing, healthcare, education, and employment deserts. When you think about tribal housing and you think about, oh, well, if their home is destroyed here, they can just go to here to tribal housing and they'll get a new house. Those waiting lists are sometimes as long as 25 years. That's why we see so many multi-generational homes, which also exacerbated COVID for that part. But when we, so you can't, again, you cannot look at the outside and think, oh, they can just go to housing, or they can just go and get their free college education, or employment. They surely everyone can work. There are reservations, I'll use Pine Ridge as an example, that are almost in some cases 2 hours away from the next place that they could potentially be employed. And so which means they're not living at home and they would have to have those extra expenses. So there, again, every profile, every reservation, every tribe, every tribal community is completely different. And so make sure that you're looking at that profile and really seeking to understand what that looks like as you're seeking to partner. Many Native Americans living on reservations don't own the land they live on, and nor does the tribe. That land is tribal trust land in many cases. I think some of that is starting to change across the landscape, which is a bad pun, but across the landscape of tribal lands, I think some of that is starting to change. But you can't, again, you can't judge it from the outside. You really have to understand what's happening inside to do that. And so if they don't own the home and it's tribal housing and they don't own the land that they live on, collateral to start a business really doesn't exist. And many Native Americans living in these reservations or further away from a metropolitan or even a rural community aren't going to have access to funding or banks, and have little or no credit. So that funding, that seed money to start these community efforts is really important to come from the outside, or to come as not necessarily from the outside, but as a partnership opportunity. Native Americans have a lot. There is my friend Monty Frank. There, hang on, let me clear that so we can see the screen. And so Native Americans generally we have the solutions to the issues we face with food insecurity, unemployment, housing, everything we've talked about, but really lack those resources to address them. And then of course, climate change has impacted that even further. We have a few tribes, one in Alaska and one in Louisiana down in the bayou. Ile de Jean Charles that are being impacted by climate change. The island off the coast of near Pointe-aux-Chenes and one of the bayous is actually sinking, and so they're looking at what's going to happen to that tribe and making decisions about that as well. And so make sure that you look at the potential as you're seeking to partner. Ask what that impact is in that social vulnerability index. And this picture is Chief Pushmataha. I always put him up. He is my ancestor, the great Chief Pushmataha of the original Choctaw, the Mississippi Band of Choctaw. And so I always just put that up. I like the picture. All right, next slide, which is the last one. So how can you support? Promote tribal sovereignty, right? Meet and ask for support, stakeholders, voluntary agencies. And I see Heidi, that means she's telling me my time is way up. That's okay. I'm almost done. You know what happens when you ask me. I'm just gonna keep going. Invest in those initiatives that have positive impacts in the communities, not the ones you believe are important, but the ones that you have partnered, and that those grassroots leaders and the youth specifically and the elders, as they come together, people know what it is that they're looking for and what they need. So really take time to listen and make that symbiotic partnership. There is no going in and just handing something to a tribe. There is saying, hey, we have this. What would you like to do with it, and how can we partner for the greatest good for the whole? And that's the only way things happen, is symbiotic partnering. for that matter. And then understand that disaster preparedness and response are just one spoke in a wheel of many issues that are equally as important. Again, those immediate needs, right? Health, housing, hunger, and education, those types of things are as important as preparedness and response. So we have to take, as partners and as internal Indigenous people and external Indigenous people, we have to go with the mindset that we're going to take that holistic view and really help build that team and really build that leadership and that continuity for that viability, that continued viability internally and externally for the partners. And I think finishing very quickly because Heidi is now getting bigger on my screen. I am actually finished. So thank you so much for having me. And I think we are going to take questions. Is that true?
Yes, we are. And I think Mike was the first one with his hand up. So Mike, if you want to go ahead and ask your question, please. Is Mike odd?
I see the hand.
Take his hand down. You don't see him anymore. If you have questions, please throw your questions in the chat box. Let's see. Let's see if there's some more. There was that discussion, somebody's talking about the Nansemond, not sure I said that nation in Virginia. I just wanted to add just a comment to what Shelley just said was, excuse me, about the generations and listening locally. One project that we were honored to partner with was not in on a reservation or a kind of standalone tribal community, but was in the tribal community in a city. And we sat with them and just talked and kind of brainstormed about needs and maybe how we might be able to partner. And they had asked their kind of a circle of elders what was important to them. And the very top thing for the elders was the youth and educating the youth. And so we really tried hard in recovery, right? To like, okay, how do we tie in educating youth? Because that's what this community is the most concerned with. And we kind of creatively were able to do that. The other thing, I just want to throw out a question to the participants here, because most of you are with the BIA, and want to ask if anyone has examples or stories they would share about how the BIA, how where you worked, or whether it's now or it was in the past, partnered with maybe a tribe or a community in some area of disaster, whether it was preparedness or response or recovery. My understanding is BIA overall doesn't really have like a line item for disaster. However, I have worked with a lot of BIA, either the regional office or kind of a more local agency folks to help in time of disaster. So I'd be really interested to hear how maybe you're creatively helping, even though you might not have line item or earmarked funds for that. And then until somebody gets brave and participates. I'm going to watch for hands to go up, or go ahead and turn off your mic and just participate. I wanted to ask a question of Patricia concerning global, kind of the global landscape, right? So I'm wondering if when looking at global needs, disaster related, or really crisis response in any type, is there a globally Indigenous led and or Indigenous focused organization or initiative or group that folks should know about or consider supporting or partnering with?
Thank you. Let me just make sure I'm off here. I'm okay. Okay, good. Thank you so much for that question. There are quite a few global initiatives that support Indigenous communities and local communities, especially like stewarding land, water, natural resources, etc. But I have a very strong opinion about through our experiences with Wayutaya, and especially, we have had between Venezuela and Colombia the refugee crisis, the highest in the Western Hemisphere, and obviously through COVID. I have seen that the best solution for this is to find your local partners that are working with these communities, because our experience, and I mean, giving a shout to CDP, when COVID hit, CDP came right away. There was no red tape. There was just full trust, and we were able to provide, and still are providing so much. But the way it was positioned is not only Indigenous community. We were able to give them while anybody else, when nobody was there. We were also supported by CDP in terms of sustainability, and that I think is key. When for us Indigenous communities, and I'm just going to kind of go off a little bit on this, but I think it's important when we talk about initiatives. You see, we like to be seen when you are working with us, communities, in how we can build capacity, how we can be prepared for disaster, for risk mitigation. Education is the tool. Education is the key. And everything that we try to do as communities, and I've seen this with the Indigenous communities all around Latin America, we want to be sustainable. And as we know that for every dollar that you spend on preparedness, $7 are saved on relief, approximately. So if you might be thinking about, okay, I want to help Indigenous communities. How can I do it? How can I donate? And I was reading this and it really resonated. The 4 R's of Indigenous philanthropy, and this is so truthful. The respect, honor the traditions, and respect the ideas of us Indigenous peoples. Reciprocity, embrace the global Indigenous value that giving an exchange in which both parties receive and take, and value our inputs. Then the responsibility is be familiar with, if you can, with the principles that are articulated in the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, recognizing the importance of having Indigenous peoples speak for ourselves. Especially in policies that have to do with our cultures, with our lands, in relationships. Understand the interrelationship of Indigenous communities, of ancestral cultures, lands, and spirituality. And most importantly, and this is why I love CDP, because you walk with us along the way when we received our helps, be flexible. In any partnership, especially with us in Indigenous communities, sometimes when we receive grants or people want to, it is so strong if we're flexible with time frames, because we have to understand that when you deal with an Indigenous communities, let's say in the Amazon, and I've seen this happen so many times, we have to get consensus with so many parts of the community, with so many leaders, cultural flexibility as well, and financial flexibility. I think if these elements are taken into account, then we can have 100% great results.
That's great. Thanks, Patricia. So Thomas kind of made a comment, and it's so important. So he's saying that, at the height of the pandemic, I'm guessing his organization, or VIA, I can't tell who he's with, traveled into the off the beaten highways and maybe paved roads on the reservation to hand out food, dog, cat, animal. Just your family and you. Oh, wow. Awesome. Bless your heart. So what CDP did, like Patricia was saying, we were able to help globally, and CDP doesn't have our own funds. It's a flow through. So we have foundations, we write grants, we do fundraising, and corporations donate to us then to do the disaster recovery. And although we really focus on recovery, we could not respond to COVID, right? So we couldn't go out, and we didn't want to spread COVID. And some of the reservations, especially in the Great Plains, we closed down, right? We hired people, we shut down highways. And so what we did to try to help, because we were having people reach out saying, you know, those couple days when the world was shutting down and everyone went to the grocery store and bought all the toilet paper and the bottled water and the dry foods, the elders and the individuals without, with disabilities and without any transportation missed that. And now it's all gone. So to reach the elders, right, in those, in the middle of nowhere, that maybe, we wouldn't know that there was a house even there. We look to other partners who already has relationships, and we actually ended up partnering with partnership with Native Americans. It's like PWNA. Thank you. I know. Right. I'm like, what does the PWNA
that's
even stand for?
Partnership with Native Americans. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Because they already had some really good existing relationships with some of the reservations and tribal, communities where we didn't. So it was a huge partnership to be able to get the needed supplies quickly in areas where they already had. And PWA really focuses on the, absolutely, I will in the chat. They focus kind of on the southern, what would I call it? The desert tribes, the like Navajo Nation in that region, and then the Great Plains tribes, which in general, again, every tribe is different, just like, Shelley said, and you guys know that too, was some of the tribes that have some of the worst disparities, whether it's health, income, poverty, unemployment. So they really are focusing on the tribes in general, in the most, oh, hey, Carrie's on, thank you. The folks that are in the most need. So we do partner with them a lot. And I haven't seen, other than sharing that story, I haven't seen folks with BIA sharing how maybe they have worked in the area of disaster. I would still love to hear anything like that. Until we do, I do have a question, another question for Shelley. So you talked about, it's so interesting, and then Patricia said it again about trust, right? And the reciprocity and really working together and partnering and listening. And I wanted to know, how can, and it works both ways, right? So how can Native organizations, whether it's a tribal agency or a tribe, tribal government entity, or even just community members, work to establish that trust with maybe NGOs or other government entities where they don't already, have a relationship. As Patricia said, we trusted them, CDP trusted them. But they had to kind of learn about us, and and they have to trust us too. It goes both ways. And I actually have a grant, and it's actually happening now, and things are happening with the tribe in the Upper Midwest, where it took a year. Granted, it was during COVID, so it was difficult, phone, Zoom, etc., of getting to know people, letting them get to know me and what CDP is about, to establish enough trust where they felt comfortable applying for a grant from us. So it's not, like Shelley said, it's not money. We were ready to give them money. It was not about an exchange of money. It was about building that trust and relationship. So I would love to hear any tips that Shelley would share.
Yeah, there are a lot, and it's really not as much about us or outside agencies building trust or with tribes. It's tribes building that trust with us, right? And so there's some tenets, I call them the high notes, basically, that I have kind of put together over, because I kind of walk the line, right? Because I am Indigenous, but then also I work for agencies that are not, they're NGOs, right? And so I kind of ride that line. But from both sides of that, what I would say is the number one thing is to be the consistent person in that seat. That's really At least have one or two people who can be interchangeable go, be consistent, and also be decision makers. Don't go with like half of an idea and not be able to, have your resources and all of your things. That's one. Two is you're definitely going to eat. So find out what that's going to look like and make sure that you contribute to that, right? It goes both ways. If there's a gift of food and there's a gift of time and there's a gift of energy in that partnership, right? That give, receive, gratitude, repeat. Like there's going to be the gift of that time in there, and you're definitely going to eat good food. And so make sure you understand how you can contribute to that. Three, be patient. Trust is not built overnight, and I talked earlier about kind of that beauty of non-linear time, right? That's not just for the start and end of meetings. It's not for that. It's just how long it takes for people to be comfortable, because you have to think about how many people have been in your seat before you who said they were staying and then they haven't, right? And that's really important. I cannot stress the consistency of that enough. If you say you're going to do something, you better do it. And that is all there is to it. And because if you don't, what you do is like what I did for the first couple of years. I mean, Red Cross for 17, but this for 9. First 3 years, all I did was listen to stories about how we were bad partners. And we were in a lot of cases, but it wasn't really that we were bad partners. The expectations weren't managed. And so save the next person in your seat that, and really be that person, or find someone who can be that consistent person. It really matters. And I think those would be the high notes of what I would say. And just go to every meeting. Don't ever not show up.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
I have a little comment about that, just in general before we finish. We've talked so much, and God, I learned so much from you, Shelly. It's incredible. You're like a master. Thank you for your knowledge. From the point of view of us as Indigenous peoples, right? We talk so much about, okay, you trust us because this is the theme of the webinar or the conference. You fund us, you help us, we know how to manage. Now, I just would like to walk away by saying, we Indigenous, how can we learn better also? How can we live? What can we do better? And I have found through the very little organization that we have at Wayutaya, and the donation from CDP a few times, and the grants that we receive from them, how sometimes when we work on disaster preparedness, we now earn the trust, right? Okay, you are funding us to help on disaster preparedness. One of the things that happened to us, for example, is here we got thousands of nutritional drinks because people were not eating, they were at home, but we have them at home. And we felt terrible not being able to deliver them, but the community, Indigenous community, activate themselves because that's what we do. We know how to get there. Now, I'm just gonna tell you, walk away with something. Every time as an Indigenous family or organization or something, even if it's disaster preparedness, try to add an element of sustainability to it.
Definitely.
A little portion of it. It will amplify the pool and will also create that sustainability. And that is our key. We Indigenous communities are sustainable. We just need the tools. So
absolutely. Wonderful. Robert, can you go ahead to the next slide, which is our wrap up? Thank you. And it has all 3 of our email addresses. And if you have further questions or want to discuss more, please feel free to reach out to us. And just one quick comment, James Redmond, call CDP. Start with us. We can't always help. We can't always partner. We don't always have money, but we have a real focus both on Native American communities and just really racial and intersectional equity. And if we can't help, we might be able to help, because you're right, most disasters do not reach those FEMA levels, but they are huge disasters to the communities that they face. So thank you very much. We ran out of time. I appreciate everyone's attention, and thanks to both Shelly and Patricia for joining us today. And it's wonderful to learn from you and with everyone else today. So thanks everyone.
thank you.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate your help.
Stop the recording now.